So, lots of people new to Kundalini Yoga, and I think a good place to start with a conversation about Kundalini Yoga is to say this. All yoga is Kundalini Yoga. But we don't necessarily think about it like that because most of the yoga, like if you tell someone that you're a yoga teacher, they say, I can't do yoga. Why? Not flexible. The word yoga, yog, means oneness with God. Doesn't say anything about being flexible, but in this time it's become known that you're supposed to be flexible to be a yogi. A yogi is someone who practices oneness with God. And just to be clear here, not the old idea of God, something outside of you, but God, the best version of yourself. It's not outside of you. How could something that's infinite be over there and I'm over here? It doesn't make any sense. It's an old way of thinking. So God is the best version of you. So a yogi, someone who practices yoga, is somebody who practices aligning yourself with the best version of you. Now, if you don't have any physical strength or flexibility, it's going to be really difficult for you to see who you are, right? When you're not well, you're thinking usually of two things. One is, I'm not well. And then the other is, you want to get better. But it takes up a lot of mental real estate when you're not well. You can't see who you are. Like I've had the flu last week, and it's really difficult to see your best self when you're under the weather. So there is a physical component, and we'll cover that. And so Kundalini, the word Kundalini it means like the light that is inside of you, and it works inside the spine. Sushumna Nadi, it's called. Imagine that you have 72,000 nerve channels that run through the body, like an electrical system. And then there's one main power center, and it's inside your spine. And Kundalini Yoga is removing any blockages from the energetic centers. And all yoga is designed to do that. Like if there's any mention of chakras, that's Kundalini Yoga. This particular Kundalini Yoga that I teach comes from a guy named Yogi Bhajan. He brought this practice to the West in 1969 from India. And it's just an effective way of moving energy. That's what it is. And you can have an effective physical hatha yoga practice to move energy. And you can also have a physical hatha yoga practice that doesn't move energy at all. Am I making sense? Sort of, right? It's energy management. That's what Kundalini Yoga practice is. And so you have to be very honest with yourself about what practices are making you see the best version of you. Because there are people I deal with, I do a lot of one-on-one spiritual counseling, and I do a lot of work with people who are, especially young women, who are doing the hatha yoga practices, and next thing you know, they're back in the eating disorder that they had when they were younger, because they're trying to keep up with, look this way, you got to eat this, only drink green juice, and you have to eat food, But there are also practices within the hatha yoga practice that can bring a lot of strength and flexibility to the body. So all yoga is Kundalini Yoga, and it is a practice of clearing the energetic centers in the body, and that's what we're here to do today. And then you apply this stuff to whatever yoga practice that you do. At our center, Dharma Temple in Vancouver, we have asana classes, like the postures, but you look at it through this lens of energy management. Because if you become neurotic about exercise, it's not healthy, right? And people do that. If you're neurotically exercising, is that connecting you to the best version of you? Have you heard of Rich Roll before? He's like a, ultra marathon athlete. He's an incredible guy. And he said once, if I don't feel like training, I don't. I train because I love it. It's kind of a cool way of looking at it, because we think especially if you haven't exercised for a while and you think you're just going to get back on the horse the way you were when you're 18 or something. It doesn't work like that. You have to give yourself a runway, right? But I love that. It's like Really paying close attention to who you are in relationship to your conditions, and then just living as you, without any rules or you're supposed to do this, or, and that's what this is about. Beyond rules, beyond dogma, being the best version of yourself. And it's not just positive thinking either, by the way, because it needs to be experiential. I could think all the positive thoughts in the world, but if there isn't an experiential component, it just washes off, just positive thinking. Because it's, like we said, weird times call for weird measures. There's a lot of pressure out there in the world. And you can't just think to yourself, oh, well, I'll just think positive and everything will be okay. It doesn't work like that. There needs to be an experiential component. Even your nervous system is designed like that. You have a sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So one part of the nervous system needs to be engaged, which means you put pressure on it. And then by putting pressure on the nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system can kick in, which is the relaxation part of it. That's how you're designed. You need to have relaxation and pressure, and then see who you are in relationship to both. And that's how an effective yoga practice works as well. That's why you lay down at the end of the class and relax, or whatever, meditate. So we got to the bottom of it. All yoga is Kundalini Yoga. So now you say, oh yeah, I've done all kinds of Kundalini Yoga. So when I say that it's a system that's aligning you with the best version of yourself, you have to think about what is that? And the way that I use the analogy is, what is the value of a child at birth? You can't say. It's not $100, $5,000, $10,000, $1 million. It's infinite. 7.56, whatever we're at now, billion people in the world. Every child is born with infinite value. And then something happens. Right? Their conditions start to tell them otherwise. Some children right away. They were born into a family where there's addiction or poverty, and right away they start to lose sight of their infinite value. And this lineage of yoga practice, 500 years ago, Guru Nanak, this Udasi yogi, he started to tell people that you're born with infinite worth. You have infinite worth your whole life. You have infinite worth even now. And you always have infinite worth. But it's up to you whether you acknowledge that. It doesn't go anywhere. What happens is people start to identify more with their conditions and less with their identity that they're born with. Those conditions are called karmas. People who aren't savvy in yoga land are always asked the question like, wait a second, I thought karma is a good thing. You don't want to accumulate karma. Like you see on the tip jar in the coffee place says good karma. You don't want any karma, actually. Karma is your life's conditions. And if you do a lot of things that take you away from your infinite worth, it creates more karma. And the karma makes it difficult for you to see who you are in relationship to your conditions. Like we said, if you're sick, it's hard to see your infinite worth when you're sick. Or you've got a lot of anxiety. Or you grow up in an environment where there's hatred. Or you don't have any food, or whatever it is. It's hard to see your infinite worth in relationship to your conditions. Right? It would be strange if the children were born and they all had like a price tag on their toe in the bin at the hospital. No child is born as a dud. Everybody's born with infinite value. And this is the teachings of Kundalini Yoga. But you have to remember that. It's like the light of your soul or something it's called. Or another way, what I like to do is, there's a yogi called Swami Shivananda. He wrote 200 books on yoga. And in the books, he repeats the same analogy over and over and over in a slightly different way. until you get so sick of it that you won't read any Swami Shivananda anymore. But there's a purpose for it. It's like how a parent tells the same story to their kid over and over and over. And at the time, the kid is thinking, what the hell's wrong with my dad? He always tells the same story. And then later on, maybe the dad's not around anymore, and the story's there. If he only said it once, it wouldn't land. It needs to be repeated and repeated and repeated. I have a student in Vancouver who rowed across the Atlantic Ocean in a rowboat by herself. And she broke her arm on the trip. This is before she tried any Kundalini Yoga. And her dad gave her a quote before she left. I don't know what the quote was, but a quote to sort of give her some gusto to push through and do this. That's a big task, you know. And she broke her wrist in the process of doing this. So she started to repeat this quote that her father gave to her over and over and over and over, so she could forget about the pain of her wrist. And she said it just seemed like the natural thing to do. Now that I'm doing the practice with the mantra, she can see this is the way that it works. You train the mind to see who you are in relationship to your conditions. That's what the mantra does, you know. She could just give up because what are you going to do? I'm out here alone or you find some way to manage it. Kind of cool that that clicked in for her, you know. I think it's a pretty neat story. So as yogis, we're getting a little more interested in your energy rather than your matter. You understand what that means? Or like yoga is the journey from dense to subtle. What's dense? Your bones and your skin and your muscles and even your thoughts and your emotions. If something is part of nature, the defining characteristic or quality of nature is that it will what? Change. That's right. That's what makes it part of nature. It's constantly changing, right? Seasons are changing. The water's changing. The earth is changing. You could drink all the green juice and do all the chaturangas that you want, and eventually your 20-year-old body is going to become something else. It's just the way it is. It's the nature of nature, right? So yoga is the journey from dense to subtle. It's getting more interested in your energy that you're born with at the beginning, infinite worth, and less interested in the density. You don't ignore the density. You got a body. It's a rental. You have to return it. You don't get to keep it. Just the way it is. And if you take care of the rental, you have a longer life in the body with less resistance. And if you don't take care of it, you have more pain and suffering. But no matter what, you got to return it at the end. So we're more interested as yogis, practitioners of yoga, in the energy rather than the matter. Beyond the body, beyond the environment, even beyond time. You know the third and fourth dimension? Time and space. And your mind operates in two dimensions. You know what those are? Duality. Good, bad, right, wrong, love, fear, I like this, I don't like that. If you let your mind rule like that, it causes a lot of suffering. There's still all nonsense going on in the world where you draw a line in the sand and whoever's on this side of the line gets all the privileges and whoever's on this side doesn't. Or I'm a this and you're a that. You know, my teacher Guru Singh, he'd say like, how many people came to the class in a blue car? And some people put up their car and he said, does it matter? It doesn't matter, but we are still living in duality. And this is not a new idea that I didn't come up with this in the shower before the class. It goes through the yoga history that the sage is able to operate beyond duality. Or the sage is the same in praise and blame. Right? Or Guru Gobind Singh, he wrote in this text called the Rayman Shabad, that the sage sits and the universe is like the potter's wheel. You know the potter's wheel? like in the movie Ghost. And the clay comes flying off the potter's wheel towards the sage as angels and devils, and the sage is not affected by any of it. Because the sage knows who they are in relationship to the matter. The sage knows that I'm not this body. I'm not these thoughts. I'm not these emotions. I have these things. But it's not who I am. You know? The idea is that consciousness, you can use, like, pick the words that make sense for you, because we're describing something that's very subtle. You can't, like if I say point to your elbow, you can point to your elbow. But if I say point to consciousness, you can't, because it's subtle, right? So consciousness or energy, nature or matter, consciousness is meant to command nature. Or the creator commands creation. Who's the creator? You are. It's not outside of you. You hear all this talk about being one with the creator in religious writing. How do you become one with the creator? By following a bunch of rules? No. You want to be one with the creator? What should you do? Think of the word. Create. Be creative. Have you ever had a time in your life where you're just working at a job that you don't really like that much, but you just need a paycheck so that you can pay the rent, and you're just going through the motions? How does it feel? Dull. Right? And then have you had a time in your life where you're really excited about a project or a relationship or something, and you're just constantly working like you're excited to work on it? And how do you feel? Radiant. You know? And we got all these ideas from the mind control of institutions trying to say, everybody stay beneath the one and only Savior up here, and you all down there have to follow the rules. And if you look beyond the marketing, that's what I call marketing. If you look past, it's the same as TV. You know, you watch the Coca-Cola commercial. They use that languaging. The one and only Coca-Cola here to save you from your sins. The same shit. You know? But if you look past the marketing, even in religion, you'll see these teachers like the Buddha and Jesus and all kinds of yogis saying, you can do exactly what I do, even better than me. The marketing even left it in the texts, and people still miss it. There isn't any hierarchy in this. You know how we know that's true? Every child is born with what? Yeah. If at the beginning when we said that and you said, well, some children are born with it and others aren't, there'd be a hole in the theory, but it's not true. And so the process of Kundalini Yoga is recognizing that in the quantum field, in the energy realm, there's no separation. There's no hierarchy. There's no God and servant. There's no guru and student. You know? It's a level playing field. Or the yogis call it infinite zero. If you're at zero and I'm at zero and we're all at zero, what do we have? Zero. It's infinite. And then as soon as we start identifying with matter, I like my rental better than your rental, or I wish your rental was my rental, or comparing and all that stuff, you step out of the quantum field or the energetic realm, and then there's hierarchy. And even yoga did this, you know. Around the 500 years ago when this stuff started coming up, even now if you ask people about Kundalini Yoga, some people say Kundalini Yoga is dangerous. Do you know why they say that? Because when this started to really be taught this concept that I'm sharing with you now, it was at a time when the British were trying to take control of India, and the Hindus and the Muslims were fighting. And then these Udasi yogis came along and said, guess what? There's no such thing as religion. There's only one God. We're all connected to it. And you can do some techniques so that you see that. You know, that's not going to work well for the British's way of taking over, colonizing countries. What do? It's called divide and... If everybody starts saying there's only one God and we're all it, then you got to use the marketing. Start telling everybody, Kundalini Yoga is dangerous. Tell your kids, tell everybody. You know, because once you start to get this, you can't control anybody. You know, I call Kundalini Yoga practice unapologetic human sovereignty. You just be you. It's like the age-old motherly advice. And you have an experiential component to deal with the bullshit in your head. I'm a this and you're a that, and I like this and I don't like that, and you know. And you need that, but it's part of the matter realm, the way that the mind is processing. Like you need to use your logical mind to drive a car. You can't use your just connect to the quantum field and drive your car. It won't work. You'll plow some people over. You know, so you need it, but it's not who you are. And when you do some of the techniques, you have an experience of that. That's what mantra works really well for that, because you're doing something and you hear the mantra going and you feel your arms aching, and then the mantra's repeating, and then you hear your mind telling you this and that and the other thing, and you start to see the separation between all of them. Oh, there's my negative mind or my positive mind, and that's my shoulders, and this is this part of my nervous system, because it's moving you from dense to subtle. When you live a very surface-based human life, you're really subtle. Like you don't see any connection in the whole system. You ever known somebody like that? Like completely disconnected from their body because they're not well. You know? But it doesn't just stop at this. I always joke and say, it's better for the earth if we're all one. It's better for the earth when you die not to get cremated and not to get put in a box. It's better to just dump your body into the soil. Nothing fancy. It's better for the soil. It's kind of a weird thing to tell people, like, just dig a hole and dump me in there. So Kundalini Yoga is awakening to the energy field within you. It's releasing your identifying with matter, karma, and conditions to experience your identity. Make sense? A little bit? Your karma's conditions are always changing. Even your personality changes. Do you have the same personality as when you were 7? No. But a portion of it is the same, and a portion of it has changed. And the more subtle you get, the more you connect to the real you. If you hang around with, like I have a 5-year-old, you hang around with her, you can see the separation between she is understanding exactly who she is, and then she's being influenced by her surroundings. You can see it. There's the line, you're able to see the line. When people get to my age, they've got all kinds of trips that they've been believing in for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. But when they're 5, you can really see the line. Like, oh, I went to kindergarten today and so said that they didn't want to sit by me. And she feels sad about that. What did you say? Oh, I didn't say anything. Okay. How does it make you feel? You know, you talk to her. Does it matter if they think that about you? You know who you are in relationship. And you don't know what happened to that person before school. Maybe they live in a home where the parents are distracted. I mean, there's so many conditions. And the idea is to be able to, when you start to understand how this works, you can see a person, you can see their infinite worth, the oneness, and you can see their conditions. You know the condition is in them. That's where compassion comes from. You know, it's like try and recognize where a person's assholeness comes from. It's not them. They weren't born like that. We already said that, didn't we? Their conditions cause them to behave like that. You know. And the interesting thing about all of this is that resistance is the best teacher that there is. Resistance will always correct the balance, and sometimes in a terrible way. For example, if somebody is addicted to drinking alcohol, they have a bunch of problems from drinking alcohol, and they start to get little teachings in resistance, maybe a health concern, or somebody says, you know, you may have a drinking problem, or they make a bunch of poor decisions, or whatever. And if they ignore the signs, what happens? When somebody decides to leave their addiction, they do what? They call it hit rock bottom. Resistance shows up in a really intense way to correct the balance. And the cool thing about this teaching is that even the missteps that you take are leading you to you. Because resistance will always show up and correct you. The challenge is, if you're a yogi and you're able to see beyond the duality of it, you'll catch the teaching at a whisper. And if you're really wrapped up in the conditions, sometimes it will become a scream or a slap in the head, or... And then you have to think about it beyond time and space, not even in this lifetime. You may be carrying this, identifying with conditions for generations. You may be even carrying the identifying with conditions of your parents, of your grandparents, for 7 generations behind. And if you don't actively do something about it, then you're a product of your environment. You know, if you, like my partner, every so often she starts to do something that's exactly like her mom, and she says, like, I'll never be like my mom. And then she's doing it. You don't tell her when she's doing it. But you notice it's happening without her even knowing. Like, it's on a deeper level. The karmas are passing through the generations. And so when you become a yogi or you're doing these practices, you say, this ends with me. I'm not passing that stuff down. There are some things you may like to pass down, and there are some things you prefer not to. But you have to do something about it. You can't just think positively. She can't just think positively, and all of these negative components of her relationship with her mother won't be healed. There needs to be an experiential component. When I was talking about Guru Nanak with the Kundalini being dangerous, he was teaching this concept called Ekankar. It means one unifying creative force. That's exactly what I'm talking about now. Ek, if you did Ashtanga yoga, you know it means one, because they count. Ek. Ekankar. It means one unifying force, one unifying field. Satnam. Satnam means truth is its identity. You know, in the old books, in the Vedas, they talked about this time in the Kali Yuga now where we live, that truth will be what you can convince someone of. Truth will be, during this time, what you can convince somebody of. You watch the news ever? Is that what's happening? Big time. A lot of talk about opinions as facts. An opinion isn't a fact. It's an opinion. But if you have a really good marketing, you could sell the opinion as a fact. And when we say Ekankar Satanam, it means that not only is this unifying field identity truth, it's your identity. It's who you are. It's the infinite worth that you were born with. And you get to decide whether you identify with that or not in your life. Don't you? And nobody can do it for you. Like, who gives you the authority to be the infinite, to be the master? Me? A yoga teacher training? No. Who gives you the authority to be that? You. And you got to do it, in my experience, you got to do it every day. Because you start identifying with all the shit. It's like, oh yeah, I'm not that. I forgot. You know? Because the mind is crazy. Like, I heard this guy saying he's 25 years sober, and then on a hot, sunny day, his mind still goes, I could really go for a beer right about now. 25 years. He knows he shouldn't do it. The mind is still there on the same trip. So it's up to you whether you identify with the trip. And the cool thing is, when you become really aware of the trips of the mind, then you don't take everything so seriously. It's like there's a fine line between comedy and depression. You know, you understand. Oh yeah, I always do that, haha. Then it's not such a big deal. But if you buy into it, the pressure is real. And who gives you the authority? You do. This is why meditation is such an important component. It's in fact the most important component of yoga. Because we have all these ideas about spiritual practice, and we have all these ideas about physical practice, but without mental clarity, they don't mean anything. Like we talked about people who exercise neurotically, or there's people who are living very spiritual lives but don't have any money, can't pay their bills, can't get a job. Without mental clarity, that stuff is useless. Mental clarity is the key. It's mental clarity that will allow you to see who you are in relationship to your conditions. And this isn't a new idea either. The sage Patanjali, he's explained that yoga is yoga chitta vritti nirodha. It means yoga is the end of the mind going all over the place. That's it. And it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you don't have any thoughts. You just know who you are in relationship to the thoughts. Because the thoughts are part of matter, nature, constantly changing. Do you have the same thoughts now as you did a week ago, as you did a month ago, as you did a year ago, as you did 5 years ago? They're always changing. And it's incredibly challenging to manage that. If you wake up every day and you're like, I love myself, I love everybody, I'm amazing, and everyone's equal to me, and you just walk around like that, you don't need to do this. But if there's an ounce of doubt of who you are, the mind needs to be cleared. It's like taking a shower every day. Or making your bed. Or imagine if you didn't clean your house for like 4 months. People treat meditation like that. Oh, well, you know, I just like to do the exercises. So the mental clarity is the key. If you don't clean your home for 4 months, what is it like? It's a mess. It's hard to be there. You don't want to hang around. You eat out because the pile of dishes. You know. So mental clarity is the most important. And the most challenging. You know. If you tell people that you teach meditation for a job, what do they say? I can't meditate. Why? No time? That's one. My mind's too busy. Yeah. I like both of those answers. If you don't have 10 minutes to meditate every day, that's a tough life, man. 10 minutes, that's it. That's all it takes. This isn't something where you have to like join the monastery and become celibate, and we're not talking about that. That's an old way of thinking. Make space to clear away your mental crap so you can show up as you. And I can't meditate because my mind's too busy. Guess what? Everybody's mind is too busy. Look at the times we live in. You know, Yogi Ji, when in the 1980s, Yogi Bhajan, who brought this practice to the West, he said, watch, in the 2000s, you'll be able to have all the information in the entire world with the push of a button. In fact, Siri, you know the Siri who lives in this phone? Siri in Gurmukhi means indescribable wisdom. It's from yogic text. And he said, you'll be able to have all the information with the push of a button, and it'll be great, but the only problem will be that it will push all your buttons. You won't be able to manage the stress of the times because the nervous system will be constantly engaged. The mind will be constantly engaged with the brain waves in a gamma wave state like this, instead of theta waves or delta waves like meditation, long waves. And then you'll be communicating from your emotions because you don't have any mental clarity. Stuck in the head of duality. In duality, what happens? I'm right and you're wrong. So blame comes out of that. And then you look at what's going on and you wonder why everybody's stressed out. Well, they don't have any tools. Except, now if you tell people about meditation, yoga, what do they know generally? It's good for you. So things are shifting. But in that same conversation, he said, you'll be able to access all of the yogic teachings with the push of a button. But will you use them? No. That's what he said. You know? And it doesn't have to be something where, you have to do 2 hours of exercise, and if you don't, it's not like that. Make space, 10 minutes a day, almost every day. Even, it's like, the idea is to let your will win. Right? Do you know what that means? If I say, I'm going to get up and do 2 hours of practice at 4 a.m. every morning, and I'm going to change my diet, and I'm going to change my habits and the people I hang out with and all of these things, and I'm going to start on Monday. Then on Saturday, I eat all the stuff that I'm not going to be able to eat when I start my spiritual cleanse. And then I don't feel all that good on Sunday because I ate all this crap. And then I go to bed and I wake up 3:30 in the morning for my 2-hour yoga marathon. And I look at my clock and I say, I'll start next Monday. You feel terrible when you do that. Let your will win is, all right, I can do 10 minutes of meditation every morning. And you do it and you keep up. And when you do it, how do you feel? Good, because you kept your commitment. When you break the commitment, actually commitment is the most important component of practice, not the actual exercise. And, we're talking about prosperity. You want to be prosperous and abundant in this life? Keep your word. If you keep your word with yourself, you'll see who you are in relationship to your conditions. When you don't keep your word, or you say you're going to do something and you don't, you disconnect from that. You feel it. If I say I'm going to do something and then I don't do it, and then I feel bad, and then I don't do it more, and then it creates neuroses. But if you let your will win, give yourself some runway, you feel more radiant. Make sense? So your yoga practice is really about releasing whatever is keeping you from the energetic field or oneness. That's what the meditations are for. To let go of the things that are keeping you. And then once you've put a footstep in the energetic field, you can match your frequency with the infinite frequency. You live from your energetic value, your infinite worth, rather than from your conditions. And it shows up in everything. The blessings and the challenges. Like people think, I'm going to start living a spiritual life and I'm not going to have any more challenges. It doesn't work like that. We said that a yogi is unaffected by duality. That means in the good times and the bad times, you show up as you. Not, if I prayed that it was going to be sunny every day for the rest of my life, think I'd get my wish? No. It's absurd. But people have that mentality. I've had a lot of students, they do some meditation retreat or training and they're like, I'm going to keep up and I'm going to do this, this, and this, and I'm going to keep the vibe going. And what happens as soon as they're gone? Two things happen. They don't do what they said they were going to do. Not because they're bad, it's just the way it goes. Right? And then some big challenges come up. It's not like, I finished all this stuff and now everything's going to be... The idea is you know who you are in the blessings and in the challenges. Like you can see the challenge and the solution at the same time. Because we live on a polarity planet. If there's a challenge, there has to be a solution. It's the nature of Earth. And a yogi, beyond duality, can see both. And knows that resistance will always show up to correct the imbalance. And by the way, take the path of the Buddha, listening to all of this stuff, and test it out. Don't just believe it because I said it. The Dalai Lama talks about these three components of living the spiritual life. And the most important thing is called empirical experience or empirical wisdom. You know what empirical means? Beyond theory. You can't really say like why, you just know. If you ever know something to be true, don't doubt that. Yeah, but so-and-so said, and it said in this textbook, and don't doubt it. That's the most important thing. If you know it without a doubt, trust that. That's the most important. And if you don't have that, in relationship maybe to a challenge or something, then you test it. You apply some techniques, meditation, or somebody tells you something, you test it. Oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to test it out. Right? And then the least important, Scripture. Scripture can lead you through that process. You read the Scripture, you test it, you have an empirical experience of wisdom. Thank you, Scripture. But the Dalai Lama, he said, if something comes up and science proves a practice that we do as Buddhists to be false, we'll stop doing the practice. We won't keep doing it because the Scripture said this is what you're supposed to do. It's the least important thing. It's not important. And it aligns with what we're talking about today. It's listening to your inner voice. You know something's true, do that. And be very conscious about who you take advice from. Because if you have a bunch of stories about why you can't do something, my teacher calls them yeah, but. You know, you tell somebody to do something and then they say yeah, but. You can always find somebody to back up your yeah, but. You can. Religious advice, your girlfriend's advice, your family's advice. But you don't want that. You don't need a bunch of people in your life supporting this, I maybe can't do this because you're yeah, but. You know, Yogi Bhajan, he thought that yeah, but was one word. And when he came from India, he said the worst word in the English language is yeah, but. You know, because you know something to be true. Somebody, you know, if you get really good advice and you're like, I know I should do this, and then that kicks in. Yeah, but I won't be able to because I'm, you know. Knock it off. Just do it. But the best person to take that advice from is yourself. Yourself is always there guiding you to you. The challenge is listening. Really deep listening. That's what meditation is for. Really deep listening. Isn't it? And if you can go deep into the experience of this energetic force or oneness with God or your true self, you can even go beyond the body so that you can heal your own body. That's what great healers do. They go beyond the surface. You know, like Qigong, have you seen the practice? I used to have this Qigong teacher. He would stand in a squat like this for 1 hour every day and not move anything. And he didn't do any other practices like exercises. And he was like a rock. And if you asked him, he said, this is all you need to do because it's energetic work. You've strengthened the container. And you see the energy. And then you can move the energy. That's what a yogi is. In the old days, a yogi was like a witch doctor. Like you needed some help with something. You know, like you had a lung condition or... There's these great stories about T. Krishnamacharya where one student comes to him and he's got a lung condition and he says, I need help. I've got this lung condition. The doctor said that you could heal me. And he said, how long will it take for the yoga to heal my condition? And Krishnamacharya said, I don't know. I won't take you as a student. Get lost, basically. And another student was like, whoa, that was intense. What was that about? And he said, I could tell by the language that he was using that he was expecting the yoga to be something outside of him, to heal him. And because of that mentality, he wouldn't do it, what I told him to do. Then he would tell all of his neighbors that he did T. Krishnamacharya's yoga and it didn't work. But he wasn't ready to do it because he spoke about it like this. When is it going to heal me? Who gives you the authority to do that? You do. Not him, not, you know. And then another student came with a similar lung condition and they said, I heard that you could heal me. And he said, yeah, we can work together. Come for a class tomorrow, one-on-one, and the class will cost $1,000. A lot of money. No problem, he said. Came back the next day with the envelope full of money and handed it to Krishnamacharya. He said, I don't want your money, I'll teach you for free. He's challenging the commitment. Right? And you have to initiate yourself. You know what that means? Like in some yoga traditions, you get initiated by the teacher. You have to initiate yourself. And be really honest with yourself. Is this practice that I'm doing serving me to see the best version of me? That's what yoga is. And there's so many ways to practice yoga. Physical practices, breathing practices, meditation practices, singing practices, painting, playing the sitar, whatever you like to do. Fixing cars, What connects you to the best version of you? Do that. You're not sure what connects you to the best version of you? What did you like to do when you were 5? It's a good thing to explore. I'm here, my mom's visiting from Panama, and she said, I think you're about 7 years old, and you came home and told the family that you were going to be a Buddhist. Like, what is that? What do I do with this? So she looked it up. She said, it looks like there's a lot of rules. Little did she know, it's not about the rules. But it's energy management. Practicing or performing actions that support the best version of you to shine through, and releasing actions that don't. No dogma, no rules, no you're supposed to do this, that. None of that. Unless you need that, which some people do. But sometimes those are taking you away from you. I use the concept of mental real estate to explain this. It's like my partner, I don't drink or anything, and my partner, she sometimes has a glass of wine from time to time. But then she was going through this time where she was like, I'm having a glass of wine with dinner, that's all I have. And then sometimes she'd say, oh, I had too many, and now I'm not going to drink, and now like all of this mental chit-chat. And this is the part that was coming out of her mouth. So who knows how much more was going on in her head. And I said to her, that's a drinking problem. It's not about right and wrong. It's how much mental real estate does it occupy. If you're thinking, like some people do that with coffee. Like some people say, I just have a cup of coffee in the morning. And there's no issue. But then some people say like, oh, well, then I had this coffee, and then maybe I shouldn't drink coffee, and then I've been thinking about quitting coffee. And then, it's really hard to see who you are in relationship to all of this when you're just walking around thinking about coffee. It's like, how much mental real estate does it occupy? Like, give yourself some space. And if it's doing that, that's resistance showing up to teach you. And if it's not doing that, then it's not an issue. And you're constantly paying attention to, does this align with the best version of me? Without any rules. Like Bob Dylan said, if you want to live outside the law, you've got to be honest. It's a good spiritual teaching. If you're honest, trustworthy, then the rules don't really matter. They sort of take care of themselves. Like that's why the Buddha was such a great teacher, because he sort of taught this idea that if you're compassionate, all the other things in life will take care of themselves. All the rules, everything. If you have compassion. That's all. If you have compassion, you can't steal from people. If you have compassion, you take care of yourself, you take care of your family. It's all compassion. And if you don't have compassion, you're greedy or whatever, you'll disconnect, and resistance will show up to teach you. When a baby is born, what is a baby like when they're born? The bones are in perfect alignment, and what's everything else? Like Jell-O. And it's a good, the architecture of a baby is a good way to describe how to live a complete human life. You need some discipline. and some freedom. But if you go in pursuit of only one, it's going to create resistance. If you just do whatever you want all the time and who cares, it will create resistance. Like I did this a lot in my life over the years. Like I would get so into just doing whatever the hell I want that I would get into trouble, and then I would go really heavy on the other end of the disciplined spiritual practice and deny all of this freedom until I was so miserably spiritual, that I would go all the way over here again. That's the duality. You need both. You need structure, and you need no structure. In fact, I think most spiritual truths are paradoxes like that. It's this and that. It isn't this and it isn't that. The strange and wonderful place that we live. But yeah, you need discipline and freedom, or grit and grace, I like to say that way. If you don't have any grit, you know the word grit? That's the sound of grit. If you don't have any grit, you'll get exploited. People will walk all over you, especially people identifying with their conditions, emotional greed, all this shit. And it's your grit with an understanding of who you are that will reveal your grace. Compassion isn't always warm and fuzzy. Sometimes you've got to stick up for yourself. Like people are like, oh, I just want to do my yoga and burn my sage and I can't watch the news because it harshes my mellow. And ineffective. A yogi is the same in all of it. You see it all. You acknowledge the pain and suffering and you acknowledge the blessings. You see it all. And the Buddha, when he was a boy, he was a prince. And his father tried to keep all pain and suffering from his view. Do you know this? So he raised him in the palace where he couldn't leave the palace, and all he saw was good food and money and everything nice. Because when he was born, the prophecy was given that he'd become a great king or a great spiritual leader. And the king wanted him to be what? A great king. Please, not a spiritual leader. So he created this whole bubble existence. And so what did the Buddha do like a good teenager? Rebel. He left, dressed up as a commoner, went out into the street, and what did he see? Suffering, sickness, death, poverty. And then thought, there's got to be some way to manage all of this, because we are all of this. Put your hand up if you've never experienced pain and suffering. Nobody. That's how we know it's our suffering. It belongs to all of us. Right? And until we get it straight and figure out that even though it seems like you're over there and I'm over here, it's not real, it's an illusion. The yogis, which the Buddha was one, they talked about this concept of Maya. It's the illusion of separateness. It appears that you're you and I'm me, but really, the word for mind in the Buddhist teachings is the same word as space. It's everywhere. Here's space. Mind is the same. And we're all moving through it. And the more we recognize that you're not over there and I'm not over here, that will reduce suffering. And the more you identify as separate, I'm a this and you're a that, the more pain and suffering you accumulate, which is resistance as a teacher. Some people are walking around believing that they're the lampshade. That's how it works. When you're the light. You understand what I mean? Like some people are black lampshade, white lampshade, Chinese lampshade, gay lampshade, transgender lampshade, all these lampshades. Well, celebrate your lampshade because it's a great lampshade, but it's not who you are. It's connected to the light inside of you. And who is connected to that light? Everybody. That's the energetic field. You understand the lampshade analogy? It's like another way of saying the car rental. And so the practice of Kundalini Yoga, and what we're going to do after this, is a daily practice to keep the energy centers open so that the light, which is Kundalini Yoga, or Kundalini, can move freely through the energetic system so you're bright in relationship to whatever's going on in your life. Because you're going to face all sorts of interesting situations. Sickness and poverty and death and birth and love and all of these things. It's all part of the experience. And the less you identify as separate, the less suffering you experience. Not individually, collectively. That's why the old die for the flag mentality, it's got to go. And it's going to happen eventually. Because this old way of thinking is not sustainable. Just look around. Look beneath the surface of the times we live in. You'll see it. And everybody's walking around pretending to be this and pretending to be that. I'll pretend I'm a this and you'll pretend you're a that, and we'll just smash into each other until we're sick of it. But if we can keep these energy centers open and the mind open, you can direct the life force energy where it needs to go. Yogi Ji said the chakras are the transmission gears of the mental body. When they can adjust to the pressure of when they can't adjust to the pressure of the times, you start slipping gears, and then your caliber starts slipping. Understand that? The chakras are the transmission gears of the mental body. When they can't adjust to the pressures of the time, you start slipping gears, and then your caliber starts slipping. So if you have blocks in these energetic centers in the body, you won't be able to see who you are in relationship to what's going on. You know about the chakras, right? Like if you don't have a nice place to live and you don't have any food, it's hard to see who you are. If you don't have a healthy relationship with your sexuality and your creativity, it's hard to see who you are. If you don't have a healthy relationship at the navel with your sense of self, your grit, right? It's hard to see who you are. If you're weak in the navel, people will walk all over you. If you have blocks here in the heart, it's hard to see who you are. You can't open up to others. Giving and receiving. That's what the heart does, right? Giving and receiving. Giving blood, receiving blood. Giving blood, receiving blood. If you can't open in the throat region, speak your truth, and it's hard to see who you are. If you're living in the busyness of the mind, I'm right and you're wrong, and it's hard to see who you are. But if we can keep these centers open, you can see your caliber that you were born with, which is what? Infinite value. You know the word prosperity? What does it mean? Break the word down. Pro means what? In favor of, right? If I'm pro iPhone. I'm in favor of the iPhone. And prosperity comes from the word spiritu, which means what? Spirit. So prosperity is not just about money. It's living in favor of what? Spirit. The best version of you. And I think the best way to describe this or explain it is the word security. You could have millions of dollars and look good on paper and have all the things and be completely insecure. Right? You could have all those things and be secure. You could have no material things and be insecure. You could have no material things and be secure. You know what I mean by security? You know who you are. Whether you have $10 or $10 million, it's just you. Aren't those the best kind of people? We admire that. Like somebody, the rags to riches story of the person who never forgot their roots, we admire that as a society. You remember who you are in relationship to your condition. And then the people who forget, what happens to them? Awful teachings. You know? That's resistance showing up to correct you. You think you're pretty good, let's see you handle this. And there's all these old ways of thinking, you know, even with money. In some spiritual traditions, like you're supposed to take a vow of poverty to show how spiritual you are. It's bullshit. You're meant to live a prosperous life. If you don't have any food in the pantry, can you feed people? If you don't have anything, how can you give anything? Yogi Bhajan said, poverty is a curse. It needs to be broken. And whose responsibility is that? All of ours. And where do you start? With you. You live from your infinite value. When you know who you are, money is just an energy. It isn't good or bad. It's what it does. Money is what money does. If you have security and you know who you are, and I'm talking about the infinite value you're born with, isn't money a great tool for you? And if you don't know who you are, money can cause a lot of harm. Can't it? So, have you heard of Lakshmi before? Who's Lakshmi? The goddess of wealth. And then she has a husband named Narayana. Have you heard of this guy before? He's the god of the universe. If you want favor with the universe, don't shit talk his wife. Oh, money is the root of all evil and all of this. It's not real. There's this great story about Yogi Bhajan when he came to the West, and he didn't have any money. He landed in Toronto in 1968, I think, in the middle of winter from Punjab, India. That'd be a shocker. You know? He landed in Toronto, and then, I won't tell you the whole story, but he ends up figuring out that he should go to somewhere like LA so he can actually live without freezing to death. And he didn't have any money. He got sponsored to go. People wanted him to teach. And he was teaching at a Vedic knowledge circle, like a very stiff around the collar philosophy kind of group, you know, like professors and that kind of thing. not the wild hippies that he ended up hanging with later on. But anyhow, a little stiff around the collar, and he finally gets paid $75. He's got no money. People are taking care of him. And he goes with the woman who arranged the course, and they go to have dinner. And they're outside of the restaurant, and there's a blind man out front selling pencils. And he starts talking to him, and he tells him that he's got a family, and he's got to feed them, and he can't work because he's lost his sight. And he said, I'll take one pencil. And he says, that'll be $1. And he says, how about 75? And he gives $75. And he said the lady was actually angry at him. She's like, this isn't India. You can't just think that everything's going to be fine. And he said, my guru will take care of me. Just watch. Gives the money. They go inside, and it's like a cafeteria style place where you get the tray or whatever. You go down the line, and then you pay. And then they get to the end to pay their bill, and the person at the counter goes, somebody was in here earlier and said if a large man with a turban comes in here to have dinner, pay for his meal. And he looked at the lady like, see? And there was change. So he gave the change to Yogi Bhajan. And he said, keep it to the person behind the desk. These are good teachings where it's like, it's not about logic. You know, logic will block you from you. You need it, but it's not the point. You know the Yogi Tea company? Have you seen it? You get the little message. Those are all from Yogi Bhajan, who brought this practice. And one day he comes into the center and he goes, I'm going to start the largest herbal tea company in the world. And a bunch of students are like, it's kind of a lofty thing. Like, what if we just start a herbal tea company? Why does it have to be the biggest one in the world? He said, that's what we're going to do. So they go, well, we'll probably have to hire some people who know about this and business and all of that. So they hire these people, and they keep ixnaying his ideas. So he fires them. And they're like, Yogi Ji, you can't fire them. And he said, you know what? We're going to run this business on magic, not logic. Watch. And you know what happened? It became the biggest herbal tea company in the world. This thing that I'm saying now, the logic and magic, is the exact same thing as energy and matter. Or if you know something to be true, you don't doubt it. And if there's a bit of doubt, test it. Put some pressure on it. A little grit. Because you have this infinite capacity to create. You are the creator. The only time you're not is when you start playing small. I'm supposed to be poor little me. I couldn't do that. Only so-and-so could do that. It's like, you're not born for that. So don't slander the goddess of wealth. You understood that, right? Don't talk shit about the goddess of wealth. See it for what it is. An energy. And if you have some patterns with that energy that's blocking you from your prosperity, do something about it. There's all kinds of meditations you can do, or you just watch your patterns. Some people do that with relationships. They're in the same relationship with 20 different people, but the same relationship. And then they don't realize that the issue is them. You see how you have to be really honest. If you're not honest, you just put the blinders on. I'm right and you're wrong. When you hear words in the yoga realm like obedience, surrender, and sacrifice, people panic. Like you start to throw the word obedience around your yoga center, people will freak out. You must obey. And there's a good reason for it, because you think it means to some robed swami or to some god in the sky that's usually a man who's judging your every thought. That's something to be afraid of, because it's bullshit. You should be afraid of that. What it means is, the idea is like sacrifice your greed. Do you understand? Some yogis, they say that the journey to enlightenment is the distance from the pinky to the thumb. What does this mean? From the navel to the heart. If you have an unbalanced relationship at the navel, what are you doing? Taking. If you get open at the navel, like an imbalanced relationship at the navel is ownership. You think you own the earth, you think you own this car, you think you own this identity, you think you own. And a balanced relationship at the navel is stewardship. You know what stewardship is? What does it mean? Yeah, you take care of it. You don't own it. Even hear the sound current of the word, ownership and stewardship. Ownership sounds closed. Stewardship, take care. I'm just taking care of this. This isn't mine. They've done studies with this too. Like people who use I, me, and mine more than ours and we are more prone to heart disease. Watch your sound current. If you're always talking about you and me, you're closing yourself. If you start talking about us and our practice and our center and our home and you're getting open. And then you move into the heart. The heart is always open. The only time the heart closes down is if you have an unhealthy relationship here or here. Think about this. If you eat bad food, what happens to the heart? Closes. Heart disease. When you came into this life with your infinite value, you were in the womb, you relied completely on another human being for your survival. You know how I know? Look down. You have a belly button. Right? This is the realm of the connection. Connect to the mother. That's stewardship. What's another practice you could do at the navel to balance the navel? Share your resources. Feed people. If you feed people, how do you feel? Even just have friends at your home and you feed them, you feel good. It's a spiritual practice. Some yogis only do that. Feed people. That's it. It's effective. People are hungry, feed them. Animals are hungry, feed them. That's spiritual practice. That's yoga. It connects you to the best version of you. When I was driving out here, there was a guy sitting on the concrete and he looked like he was having a tough time, and so we bought him some food and gave him some food, and he had a story about what happened, and my mom said, I wonder if that story's true. And then I said, does it matter? It doesn't matter. And we get into this whole thing of like, oh, but what if he's not telling the truth? I'll tell you right now, he's sitting on the cold concrete, not having a good life. And if he's lying about it too, it's even tougher. How can he see who he is? Feed them. Yeah, but just get out of your head. You can really heal people through that. Or if you get stuck in your head all the time. Anxiety is one of the leading causes of all the health issues. Anxiety is overactive in this area. What are we going to do when, you can't turn it off? Like if you're really stuck in your head, your mind sounds like this. You're walking around like a ticking time bomb. And that will cause heart disease. Or, I'm right and you're wrong. That will cause it too. So sacrifice your greed, your me and mining. Your corruption takes you away from your best self. When you sacrifice greed, joy can arise. I said this journey. This is the journey from me to we. Right? Ours, this is ours, not mine. It really works. Should we do an experiential component? Yeah? Are you still awake? You will be soon. All right. Do you have any questions about this before we go on? Is this making sense? You understand what Kundalini is? Kundalini is a light. Imagine that the chakras are like magnifying glasses. And if you are open, the magnifying glass is there, and then you shine a light from the base of the spine up, and everything lights up. And if there's a blockage, like, I'm greedy, or, I don't have, well, you guys are advanced because you came to a course like this. We don't have to go down there, but I'm greedy, or, I don't speak my truth. Then there's a block, and the light can't illuminate you. Yes? Yep. Like, what is resistance? Yeah, it's like, if you're doing things that are not in alignment with the best version of you, it'll show up as resistance to correct you. So it'll be like, I use the addictions one quite often to explain it because that's effective. But it's like, imagine, say we said you're in the same relationship over and over and over. Well, the experience of that relationship over time is going to get worse and worse and worse until you get it. It's not going to stay the same. So it's like, that's why the missteps are leading you to you. Because eventually, and you have to think about it beyond time and space. Like the yogis say that you have 84,000 lifetimes to get it right. That's a lot of resistance. But this happens even like when somebody begins to live a spiritual life. Doesn't matter their life conditions. They could be a junkie, or they could be wealthy, or they could be whatever their life conditions. They come to a point where they go, there's got to be more to life than this, right? So they ask the question, who am I? And usually it's something that leads to that question. And that something is usually resistance, showing up to correct you. And then, like in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is telling Arjuna he has to fight in this battle. And he's saying he doesn't want to. And at the beginning, he speaks to him in a regular tone of voice. Like, you need to, it's your destiny. And he's like, nah, I don't think I want to. So he ups the volume. You need to do this. Yeah, but, I don't think I want to. You really need to do this. Yeah, but do it now. And then he does it. That's the resistance as teacher. And the deeper you get into this practice of meditation, you should be able to catch those lessons at the first part. But if you don't, it's just what you needed. There's nothing wrong. It's all unfolding. But it's up to you to decide how much suffering or how much resistance you want to experience. Like we said with the infinite worth. It's always there. Whether you acknowledge it or not is up to you. And if you don't acknowledge it, you'll be corrected. You just will. It's the way it works. It happens in nature all the time. It's always correcting the balance. And then if you go beyond the nature, see who you are in relationship to something to think about, I guess. But yeah, it's a big teacher, Or like, I have a friend who had throat cancer. He's been practicing yoga for probably 40 years. He got throat cancer, and then he said he's never smoked, never did drugs, nothing, lived a very clean lifestyle. And he said, I think that I got cancer because I was just too comfortable just going through the motion. That's a tough teaching. But he said when he got cancer, all of a sudden he was showing up better as a father, as a grandfather, so resistance was showing up to teach him. Where on the surface, it looked like, I have cancer and I might die. Oh my God, what are we going to do? And you almost think that resistance showed up to correct the things that he was doing that were not aligning him with who he was. Even though on paper, seems like a pretty good guy. Why does he have cancer? And there's tough lessons. But I don't want to ever be some kind of teacher who says like, oh, well, you're not going to face them. The idea is to know who you are in relationship to them. The idea is that the yogi is the same in praise and blame. And then you'll always have the opportunity to be corrected and return to who you are. That's why some of these great yogis like Ramana Maharishi, when he got sick, all the devotees were crying and upset because they were going to lose their teacher. And he basically was like, you dummies, like, I'm not sick. Haven't I taught you anything? This is the body. It's going to happen. So the resistance is we call it the Saturn teacher. This is a tough. Saturn teacher is the gritty teacher. Because don't you get the teachings in both? Sometimes it's the gratitude and the blessings, and sometimes it's the shit. And so the idea is to see who you are in relationship to all of that. Because you can't get rid of the duality. That's the nature of this planet. But if we all woke up every day and said, I'm going to commit 10 minutes every day to acknowledging that I want to be happy and that I want to be free, and that all beings want to be happy and want to be free, it would change the vibration on the planet. That's the Buddhist loving kindness meditation. It's very simple. And then when you disconnect from that, I'm just going to do what I want, resistance will show up to correct that. And it shows up in nasty ways. Violence, and oppression. But it's always restoring the balance. Somebody asked the Dalai Lama once, how can you teach about joy when there's all these terrorist attacks and all this pain and suffering happening in the world? You know what he said? Think about this. Right now, there are millions of parents who are loving and supporting their children all over the world. It's true. You don't think about that. It's like, oh yeah. And even though some of these horrific things that happen, I think it's resistance as teacher. It's going, if you think in your mind that you're separate from everybody else, and it's your pain, and nobody understands you, and it's somebody else's fault, and you get caught up in that neuroses for long enough, you behave violently. But if you learn to manage that, and we know that it's not unique to one person, it's all of us. So we can see past the conditions and see the person. Doesn't mean that you excuse their behavior. But you know that they weren't born like that. And if we deny that, which we do, just talk to somebody sometime about this who's very right-wing, conservative person. Here's a radical spiritual concept. There's nothing happening on the planet right now that's beyond forgiveness. Your logical mind goes like, what? But what about so-and-so? Isn't it true? And the more we deny that, the more resistance we create. We are one. There's no other way to look at it. That's why the baby analogy works so well. Because nobody's born like, let's just put them in the sale bin. There's the conditions that start to tell you that's who you are. And if you don't have any tools to manage it, you start believing it. I had a girlfriend when I was maybe 20 years old who, her father told her when she was a kid that you couldn't trust people with red hair. It's a real thing. And she carried this her whole life and thought it was a normal thing. And I was like, what? That's not real. But it's identifying with conditions. I worked one time for this Lebanese guy, and he was a sweet guy, hard worker. And then one day at lunch, he started going on and on about the Jews at lunch, and I was like, I don't think I can work here anymore. This is like a toxic environment. And then later that day, he sawed his thumb off with a saw, so I took him to the hospital and never went back to work. Holy shit, there's a resistance as teacher. And this is the times that we live in. People are waking up, which is great, and some people are refusing to wake up, and it's causing a lot of resistance. But it's going to happen, whether you want it to or not. But our job as people who are doing work like this is to try and do it with as little suffering as possible. Which means you influence through your presence. That's the most important thing. Not through shooting people. You know what I mean? You influence through your presence. You initiate yourself. You do your practice, and people will see. It's like clean up your aura. And then people around you will notice that. That's why it's so important that the mental clarity part is so key. Because if you're walking around with a bunch of toxic waste in here, it's coming out. If you stuff enough boxes in the attic, eventually they're showing up on the main floor.